Okay, welcome to the event show live. Thank you for joining us. A big thanks to those that are tuning in again. We thank you for the support of the show, and a big thanks to those that are joining us for the first time. It's really great to have you all here with us today. The purpose of this show has been to hear from some influential leaders within our industry, and also bring us together as event people to share some of the challenges we've been going through. But also, especially now, to look at the opportunities that are re-emerging. And certainly in today's chat, we'll hear from some of those who have really been leading the way, leading some of the teams to successfully and safely deliver some of our largest high-profile events during this COVID phase. So really looking forward to hearing from our panelists today, of course. Just before that, for those of you that haven't joined before, my name is Andrew O'Loughlin. I've been working in events for many years, had the pleasure of working with many of you and with a few of today's panelists on major events in the past. But these days I'm now out helping event teams design or rebuild their events, taking an experienced design approach. As we know that the experiences that we provide are really what matters the most, and ultimately whether people will sign up and show up again to our events. Also working on some initiatives such as this show, along with some resources and online courses, all really with a goal of sharing some of the learnings that we all have, and to help us navigate our way through the industry. And I think we all know that there's still some challenges happening, but the opportunities will also start to emerge as they always do in events. So hopefully we can be helping you in some way to get back to having the success that we all deserve to be enjoying in our industry. And so speaking of successful events and successful leaders in our industry, I'd love to go to our panel. So it's a pleasure to introduce Todd Harris. Todd is CEO at Stadiums Queensland. So welcome, Todd.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great to have you on the show. Also like to welcome Lindy Murphy, who recently helped deliver the whole 2020 Suncorp Super Netball League, all from within a hub in Queensland. So welcome, Lindy.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here.
Great to have you on the show. And likewise, Brendon Downey. So Brendon leads the team at the event crew up on the Gold Coast, and has been one of the first teams to lead the way in delivering some of our first mass participation events, including the Gold Coast Running Festival in recent times. So welcome, Brendon.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you all on the show, and we'll jump straight into it. I will ask or call out if people want to drop questions into the Q&A box and chat away as we go. Feel free to do so. As I always say, it's important for us to know what it is that's on your minds or what you want to hear about. So please don't hesitate to do that, and we can get to some questions as we go. So I think, Todd, I might come to you first. I know you've been a busy man in your team up there in Queensland, and delivering some big events at the Gabba and other stadiums. So perhaps if you can just give us a quick rundown of some of the highlights, I guess, from recent weeks and months for you and your team.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Probably the one that's most prominent and most recent was the AFL Grand Final. So a massive highlight for our team to obviously be involved in that, to have secured that in Queensland, and to deliver that for the first time in 124 years out of Victoria. Going back 6 months ago, certainly if you'd have asked me, that was even in the realms of possibility, it just wouldn't have even been considered. But we were sitting in Townsville 6 months ago, literally 2 hours from the first event at a brand new $300 million stadium, when the PM stood up and said there's this thing called COVID that's coming to Australia, sadly. And as of Sunday night, so this was a Friday afternoon about 4:30, as of Sunday night, mass participation events and mass gatherings will cease. I actually had the Commissioner of Police in a room beside me, and the whole town in Townsville was absolutely buzzing, ready to sort of walk into their brand new facility and see the Cowboys hopefully have a win, which wasn't the case. Should have told us something then, but it was a real bizarre moment to think there was a possibility that the PM was going to say there is no mass gatherings immediately, and we'd been working for 3.5 years building and getting ready to commission this venue, and it was at risk that there was not going to be 25,000 plus people allowed into the event. I said to the commissioner, look, if he cancels mass gatherings right now, I think you better get your police on the streets. They'll riot in the town. So it was a highlight, but a low light at the same time, that we went from this massive buzz of brand new facilities, state-of-the-art venue, really enthusiastic regional city in Queensland that was just ready to explode, and then we literally had to pull the shutters down and stop events after that first event. So we've ridden the wave in the last 6 months. We went from that to zero, and then progressively worked our way back, and obviously we're able to secure and then deliver the AFL Grand Final. So it's been one hell of a 6 months, I must say.
Absolutely. And I think congrats to your team for, I guess, riding that wave and leading the way. I know that Queensland's obviously been able, but also put its hand up to host these events and help us re-emerge as an industry. Can I just ask you quickly, I suppose, what's some of the things that have perhaps surprised you the most in terms of what it is you've had to do, or has some things been a lot more challenging than you'd ever anticipated, or have there been some things which have come together a bit easier than you might have thought?
Yeah, I probably the real positivity that's come out of it. There was hundreds, if not thousands, of different issues that bubbled up, particularly in the first 8 weeks or so. What came out of it was everyone was motivated to actually find a solution. So people or organisations that you would normally have around you in the event space, that often at times there might have been tension on particular issues, that just didn't seem to arise. You could cut through issues, and everyone was genuinely trying to get an outcome that was positive. So the collaboration or partnership piece was unbelievable for us, and it continues to be that way. I think the benefit that's come out of COVID for us is just the relationships across the board from the multiple groups that are associated with big events, whether it be external from venues, police, transport agencies, all of those that really are critical to the success of an event. They all just got arm in arm, and we really pushed through mountains of issues quite rapidly, and we're able to find solutions that may not have been perfect, but they were solutions that allowed things to continue. And that was probably the best part that's come out of the last 6 months for our entire team. The strength of relationships that have been formed or enhanced has just been outstanding.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and there's some good things which have come out of this, which is great to see and is important to go into the next.
Just some extra comments on that, and I would totally agree with what Todd has said around that. Like we really benefited from that. We're a small organisation, and we can't do our events on our own, and we had the same thing. The partnerships that got us going, Stadium Queensland, the classic example. We ran our first COVID-safe event inside that. But as we worked through creating, the frameworks, there were 2 frameworks in particular here in Queensland that we worked into the industry framework for the events industry, and there was also a outdoor sports plan, which for us is an outdoor sports type events. They sort of rapidly developed, and so it comes to that old management strategy of move quickly. You may make some things, may make a few mistakes along the way, but then you've got time to actually to work through those And we found the same thing that Todd did, that our partners, the people that we relied on and needed to help us, really came to the fore and helped us through that. And I think that's going to be what we've seen in Queensland, is what we're going to see even faster happen in New South Wales and Victoria as they open up, because they're going to have the benefit of being able to see how things evolved, and the resources and the processes that are now in place up here, are going to really help those areas, I think, open up faster than what we did.
Can I ask Brendon, and perhaps if you can, for those that aren't aware of the recent events you've been running, but perhaps just talk us through a couple of those events which you have rolled out in recent weeks. But along with that, I suppose, positive aspect of collaboration, was there an element of extra scrutiny on you being the first events to re-emerge, either scrutiny from stakeholders or from your participants, or did you feel that everyone sort of gave you a bit of grace to get things back up and running?
There was a lot of questions from all stakeholders and participants, our volunteer groups, even our contractors and staff, around what it meant. So, we're a small company. We have 6 staff, and most of our events are what I would call medium-sized events. We typically run events between 1,000 and 2,000 people. Events that start, we're scaled and we're geared to deliver those events efficiently, and that's what we do. So at CBUS, we run the Gold Coast Running Festival, sponsored by 7 News, and that event has been going for 10 years. So we had a really strong relationship with the guys at the stadium there, and so there they were rapidly developing their plan for the stadium, and then at the same time, I'm rapidly developing a plan for our event, which isn't just inside the stadium; it's also in the streets through the suburb, and we close a 10-kilometre stretch of road right through the middle of the Gold Coast. So so then the communication of getting our plan and what that meant for various stakeholders across to them, and for them to understand the rapidly changing requirements from government. And in Queensland here, we actually were, I think, relatively organised, with public health leading the way. Queensland Public Health did a great job, but the poor people in Queensland Public Health lumped with everything. So they were doing contact tracing, they were trying to organise, things around COVID testing and new clinics and things like that. These things are really important. And then on top of that, they were then suddenly given this task of going, okay, how do we approve, events that were coming? And bear in mind, these are not events people. So, so we were having to, work with them and find ways to make it easy for them to understand what it was that we were doing, what the actual risks were, what the mitigation strategies were, and so on. So I think that's the thing to really bear in mind as people do open up and they get themselves approved. And you're going to be working with people that aren't event people, that need to understand, what you're doing. So, I think that's probably what I would say in that space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Andrew, I'll just add to that, and I'm conscious Lindy hasn't had a chance to talk yet, so I'll shut up shortly. But that we absolutely did feel that scrutiny, but we welcomed it as well. So what we did was we actually went and met proactively with the Chief Health Officer in Queensland and started to ask her right back before, when everything was shut, what do we need to do to convince you that we can start to bring people back in? Can we agree on a set of principles that will allow us to develop a plan? And she was absolutely fantastic with the openness. And again, to Brendon's point, a medical expert, not an event expert, so had no concept of our world and what we need to do. But we spent a good couple of hours with her, but then went and actually connected with every local public health unit, which is a bit of a regional team approach throughout Queensland. I don't know how many there would be, but Brendon has one on the Gold Coast, there's one on the south of Brisbane, north of Brisbane, and so on and so forth. So there was multiple public health units that we needed to connect with. We then started to step through those agreed principles and develop plans. And we included a contact from the public health unit and invited them along to every event. So they could actually start to learn our business, but they could give us feedback on the fly that allowed us to actually be responsive and adapt some of the venue operations to make sure that we could, improve, because by no stretch were any of the, opening events perfect at all. There was lots of bits and pieces that needed to be improved, from signage to sanitizer, you name it. There was a real agile response that needed to occur, and it probably is the buzzword. But to give a bit of sense around the pace, we started allowing sport back in, no spectators, just purely the key people that were needed to host the event, broadcasters and so forth. We had about 3 weeks to develop a plan and have that ready to launch into what was first the NRL season and then shortly followed by the AFL. We were then allowed to open up for crowds of 2,000. We had 3 days to respond to that and prepare a plan for 0 to 2,000. And then progressively we stepped to 25, 50 and 75%. And the shortest time frame we got between some of those movements was 24 hours. So we had to change the layout across venues to accommodate the health requirements in the space of 24 hours when tickets have already been out on sale. So agility, as much as the word now drives me a bit nuts, was absolutely key, absolutely key. But introducing the health experts to actually proactively scrutinise, I think, was a key part of our success.
I think that's brilliant. So I love the way you sort of painted the picture there for us in terms of what was going on behind the scenes, and those learnings are really critical for us to be able to apply, I think, in the planning that we're currently all doing. And Lindy, I'd love to bring you in, and I'd love to hear about the experience that you've had with the Super Netball League, and I guess if you can paint the picture a little bit for us in terms of what it's like working within a hub, within a bubble, and rolling out an entire professional sport competition. So can you take us through, I guess, some of the highlights or some of the key points?
Yeah, look, we went from, our competition was supposed to start the first week of May. It was postponed until the first week of August. And with the constant, I suppose, escalation of what was going on around the country with increases in cases, all of the states have different regulations and guidelines. So there was a point where we didn't think we were actually going to be able to deliver a season. And it all happened incredibly quickly. The executive team at Netball Australia received a call from Queensland Government on a Friday night that they would come to the party with the funding to be able to relocate the competition. Teams were advised on the Sunday that they were all going to Queensland, and then it was just hellish trying to move teams, move umpires. Some teams had to go into isolation, other teams didn't. The Victorian teams were particularly disadvantaged. We initially thought we would be running a hub in New South Wales and a hub in Queensland and splitting the league across both states. Well, that was quickly shut down, and the Victorian teams were actually on the tarmac, ready to fly to New South Wales when they were all taken off planes, sent back home again, and then their flights were rescheduled for Queensland a week later. So it was chaos. It was absolute chaos. The 4 key SSN staff members that were responsible for delivering the league, by the time we were given permission by the Queensland Government to arrive in Queensland, we arrived 2 weeks before the league started. So the 4 of us were still in hotel quarantine while we were delivering the first 3 rounds of the competition. So that was pretty tough. We were working with people remotely that we'd never even met before, trying to develop relationships and protocols through Zoom meetings. We had 2 hubs set up. So I can very much relate to what Todd was saying, in that it was a very, very chaotic start to the season. There were lots of mistakes made, but overwhelmingly, the greatest thing that I think we were able to achieve was that everybody was so focused, so determined that we needed to deliver this competition for all sorts of reasons, commitments to broadcast, protecting commercial partner arrangements, the social implications for people that could watch the league back in those states like Victoria, who had absolutely nothing in their lives at that point in time. It was crucial that this was delivered, and everybody was in the boat rowing it the same way to get this competition up and running. Things did settle down after about the first 4 weeks, but it was chaos.
It's a tremendous feat, and I think for some of the reasons you've really touched on in terms of the way that you had to react and how quickly and the way you had to communicate and work. Are there some things I'm really fascinated in terms of the whole process that you've gone through? Are there some things that really stood out in terms of some of the things you had to do and spend time on in this environment so that were different to the norm?
There was a lot of liaison, obviously, with government, trying to get people into Queensland. There were a lot of challenges in that Queensland, unfortunately, is a little behind the rest of the states in terms of the accreditation and qualifications of a lot of their technical officials, bench officials and umpires. So at one stage, we didn't think we would even have enough people to actually deliver the competition, given we were running across 2 hubs. So we did have to bring in a lot of people from New South Wales and Victoria. Of course, a number of them had to go into isolation if we didn't get them out in time. So there were a lot of challenges around coming up with policies on how that would work, entitlements for people, what the league could afford to and not cover in terms of compensation. People from Victoria were relocating their whole lives, and we were having to set them up in home offices, in their hotel rooms, so that they could continue their ongoing work commitment whilst officiating for the league. So that's something we'd never had to do before, because we have it's a state-based competition that each of the states run nationally around the country. So all of a sudden we were dealing with challenges that we'd never encountered. And that did take quite a lot of time to ensure that we were able to make people feel comfortable and content and happy to work in that environment. There's a lot of challenges with hub life.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Some of the things which I'm sure there's skills and characteristics you've always had within your team, but some other things which were heightened in terms of the need to be able to communicate and trust people and build relationships.
That's right, and that was the challenging thing. You were working with a lot of people that not only had you never met before, you'd never worked with them before. So all of a sudden, you had 2 or 3 weeks to try and develop working relationships with people. And everybody, as we all know, we all have different work styles. We had ranges of event experience within the team, some very experienced people and people just starting off in their careers. So they needed to be mentored while they were really hitting the ground running.
Yeah. And Lindy, I know from working with you, you're a big advocate for planning, but also an understanding that plans sometimes are useless when it comes to the event itself. But I guess that mentality of being able to adapt, and Todd's already mentioned, being agile. I imagine that was particularly apparent in terms of changing plans and standard.
Absolutely. And some people are very, very good at adapting to change, as we all know. It was interesting who was very resilient and could cope with the change. There were others who struggled enormously. And it took us some time to bring them on the journey with us to be able to deliver the competition.
Mm. And look, I think it's really interesting for us to hear from the experiences, obviously, that you're all going through. And I feel like there's different parts of Australia and New Zealand are at different phases of progression with obviously with events, but life in general. So perhaps, Brendon, if I come back to you, I'd love to hear from your experience. I know that you had to essentially develop a roadmap. We all know there wasn't really a roadmap in place of how to navigate our way through COVID, but you're perhaps not out the other side yet, but you've been through a number of events, and I know you've been very generous sharing, I guess, your learnings and experiences of developing that roadmap. So can you give us a bit more of an insight in terms of, I suppose, what some of the things that you developed, and then what you saw as valuable, and where to spend time and energy, and perhaps some things now that perhaps aren't quite so important that you thought might have been?
Well, I mean, we'll go right back to March, and we had 4 events that were. I'm a big planner, and there I was in March with events in April that were fully planned. Everything was booked. We had all our resource, all our medals and gifts and everything was all. They're either where they had them in stock in the warehouse, or they were on their way and paid for. So we suddenly at a situation where we had 4 events cancelled on us, and so we're just a small event company, and I'm a family business, and we have 6 staff and about 30 contractors. We then have a number of suppliers that work in the industry to rely on us, and then we have all our volunteer groups and so on. So our reach and our impact is actually quite large. I was having a look and going something like our small company is something like about $12 million of economic impact. And the majority of that's in southeast Queensland, and a fair bit of it on the Gold Coast. So, so there was a lot of pressure, and I felt that around, protecting staff, trying my best to look after all of the people that were important to us. So the first thing that we did was we actually went, okay, how can I get the financial control of this and understand that my business is going to be on, upright on the other side of this if we deliver no events for 12 months. So, the JobKeeper was massive for us. It really, it did set us up to be able to go forward. So then we started talking to a couple of our key partners, and one of the things that I did pretty early on was we were talking with Triathlon Queensland, who are a major partner of us. We deliver something like 35% of the state's participation. So, we're important to them. They're very important to us as well. And the membership base is very important. So we were talking to them, and they were doing some calculations looking at what the impact was going to be for them. And they were thinking, gee, we might be 40% down in membership here. And that's not something that would mean that they would be, in their current model, would be sustainable. So that not a scenario that's good for us. If their membership's down, that's bad for us. So we were talking to them, and they have a number of events and a number of activities and things that they deliver. And the opportunity arose for us to take a small contract with them. And that small contract meant that I could then pay my staff full time. So we went from a situation of, we had a 6-week period there where staff and myself included were on JobKeeper. And suddenly this little contract meant that we could top everybody up and hit them back in the office working full time. So what that did was, it meant that we were then suddenly in the same space working on the COVID plans full time, and we weren't worried about where our company was going to be. So we were working on the plans full time. I would say we put about 200 hours in, and I put a couple of eggs in a couple of different baskets. We were working in the event industry space, trying to make our plan work for that. At the same time, I was working quite closely with Triathlon Queensland around the sports plan, because we knew that community sport was likely to get up early on in the piece as well. And of course, spending quite a lot of time watching what people like Todd were doing in the stadium space and so on, and trying to learn from that as we went. I talked to a lot of people. I was talking to people at Ironman, other event companies of similar size to us, people like Mark Emerton, Elite Energy in New South Wales, and of course contacts in New Zealand that I've worked with, and a lot of race organisers that I raced with when I was competing myself that are still organising, and we were sharing ideas and ways through that. And it was very fast. I mean, we're talking in a 2-month period. It was changing weekly what was required, and we were adapting our plans as we went. So one of the things that I didn't expect to happen was in their contract with Triathlon Queensland, one of the things we said was, well, let's put on a free swim. And we sort of were timing it and trying to work out, as a way to sort of provide something for our members, a bit of hope for the industry and the people involved, the coaches, all the people that really mattered. So we put it on, and it was great. They all came, and that day we tested all of our COVID plans, our QR codes, our wristbanding, all the things that we were doing right at the beginning. And, so again, it wasn't perfect, and we learned a lot from that. We got our contact tracing organised and that. And we talked to these people and we said, look, we've got these other events coming. We at that point, we'd actually got our COVID approvals for the first triathlon, and of course the run festival. And off the back of that, they all started entering and supporting us. So it was a free event, but it really set us up in so many ways.
Mm. Yeah, it seems to me, Brendon, that there's been this necessity for planning and COVID safe plans and sort of these layers of administration and logistics. But as you're calling out, it's been very much about relationships and forming stronger relationships with stakeholders and with participants and trying new things, isn't it? I mean, it's not just been about the nuts and bolts. It's about people coming together to make things happen.
Absolutely, and back to some of the earlier points we talked about, and people were so receptive and open, and the problems that we might have seen otherwise, we found ways through. As I say, the biggest thing was actually communicating and making sure that they knew what the latest was in the plans, because things were changing rapidly. And we actually had a situation, I think, in August, where we had a couple of COVID cases coming out of Victoria, and that changed the government's stance on outdoor gatherings. And so there was some confusion around, what was allowed to happen as a result of that. There was, this maximum of 10 people allowed in an outdoor gathering, but then there was this caveat around, well, if an event or a business has a COVID safe plan, then they could have more as per that plan. And so that was quite a confusing time. And as I say, it was right before we were getting our first events up. And, we were spending so much time just communicating what was allowed, what we were allowed to do, and that we were approved and that we were going ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
We sort of had similar experience in one sense. So obviously we've run 5 major stadia in Queensland, but we have 4 other venues that are high performance community academy of sport. We have at our venues, and we had a real push from Olympic sports, particularly that do use a lot of our facilities to try and get back to training in the first 4 weeks. For many athletes, swimmers and you name it, for them to be out of the water for 4 weeks is a significant thing in their world. Some of them have never been out of the water that long in their life, in their swimming careers. And so whilst our venues were technically closed publicly, we're actually started, the first people back were Olympic athletes that were focused on Tokyo. And at that stage, Tokyo hadn't even been postponed. So there was a real push to get them back. And we allowed them back into some of our facilities in a very, very managed manner, and to the point where we were, 2 or 4 athletes in a 50-metre pool with very tight scheduling. But we were able to actually then use the learnings from those very small groups to go, okay, well, when we start to open this back up to the public, we can test some of the things on this small group. So, no showers after training, and pathways just in and out of venues so there was no crossover, and those sorts of, they seem like minor things, but when you start to introduce thousands, it becomes critical. So it worked really well for the athlete to get them back in, but we learnt a lot out of just their human behaviour that would occur when they left the pool deck, and previously they were hardwired to leave the pool deck and go to the shower, and we'd shut the showers. So we could observe that behaviour and then learn from that and adapt our plans to really get it ready to open back up to the public. So it was critical that You just had to observe and learn and change almost daily, and communicate with those groups as well when they were in the venues, that there were certain things that they previously used to do they couldn't do anymore. So it was changing the human behaviours as well.
Certainly been a very rich period for learning and experiencing, and I guess if we reflect on those experiences you've had, we can use those and those conversations and observations you've made. I think that's it. To put an optimistic view on things, it puts us in a good place to keep developing and evolve what we're offering, doesn't it? On that note, Lindy, I guess it was probably a fairly rich learning environment, to put a positive spin on it, to being inside a hub and having an intense period of delivering events. Are there other key learning you think you'll take out of that experience and use in the future?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see how much of the COVID compliance remains in place. And I think probably a fair bit of it should. I would say that some of our operations, back-of-house procedures, etc., possibly have been a little lax, and they do need to be tidied up in terms of meeting, health regulations and keeping people safe. And it was great having such a condensed program. We delivered the program in 12 weeks. So in delivering 8 games a week, it gave us plenty of opportunity to actually, as Todd was saying, trial procedures, refine them, what did work, what didn't work, how you communicate change to people, how you actually make people accountable, and how you manage people that won't comply. So there were quite a lot of learnings there, and I think some great procedures that we should be rolling out across the country in 2021, if we're lucky enough to get what we would call a regular season up and running again.
And I actually recall we had Chris Symington on the show, who's the CEO of Super Netball, some time ago. It was prior to the season, and we talked a little bit about some of the things that they were needing to put into place and trying to put into place. He talked about some innovations and potentially introducing some. He said that perhaps we might wait till next season, but there were a couple that were introduced this year on the field of play. I guess without going too much into, I suppose, the pros and cons of those rule changes, I mean, do you see this as being a bit of a catalyst to changing the way the game is played, but also the way that the broadcast and fans might experience the product that you offer?
Yeah, look, there was a lot of mixed response to one of those rule changes. I'm not certain that the whole netball world actually loves the 2-point shot. The key learning from introducing a new rule such as that has such a significant impact on the way teams play, teams are coached, the game's officiated, is that it really does need to be rolled out in an underpinning high performance program or a pre-season program before you introduce it in the main event. It was exciting. I was not a fan of it initially, and it's not because I'm a netball traditionalist, but I could foresee the issues we were going to have with actually managing it and the game management protocols around that. And that caused a fair bit of tension for teams and umpires and bench officials who were trying to manage it. We really didn't have the appropriate technology to manage the implementation of that new rule. And look, I think I did come to love it in the end. I think it adds an exciting element to the game, but I'm not sure in hindsight that the way we introduced it was possibly the right way to go.
Yeah, well, it certainly provided a good talking point, and I think
it did.
In some ways, any change that creates some excitement and conversations can be a good thing. And I'm sure there's plenty of sort of catalysts in this phase which might play out further in the future. Todd, similar to that question, in terms of what you see as remaining the same from what you've recently introduced, and what you think might change back more to how it was in terms of from operating procedures or the commercial environments or upcoming or events you might host? How much do you see your stadiums returning back to how they were, or has the game changed completely for you up there?
Probably the latter, I would say. That I mean, humans revert to, you know, their default behaviour all the time. So to change some of that's been really difficult and really interesting at the same time. One thing that was a real positive that was forced through, and it's completely been accepted, is cashless. Every venue is now cashless. So that won't ever go back, I don't think. That'll stay as is, and everyone's loving that. There's the odd person that bubbles up and, you know, with a $10 note, but generally speaking, we've completely shifted how point of sale and food and beverage is handled in venues. I think there'll be some evolution in that space in terms of, you know, whether it be a click and collect. In-seat, in stadia is very challenging in mass gatherings, but there might be a bit of a hybrid on that, and we're looking very closely at that with our caterers as to how we can adapt and probably offer some of that in the future. Sanitisation generally and cleaning, I think there is an expectation that is of the highest level and highest quality. We actually surveyed firstly a sample of 200, and then we pushed that through to a much bigger audience when we shifted from 50% capacity to 75% capacity. And the survey results were really interesting around what people wanted to see, what they were happy with, and also what they were doing themselves. So use of masks in Queensland, because of the situation, there's not a lot of community transmission, or zero really, aside from, you know, those that are returning from overseas. Masks, just the uptake of masks, we handed them out at the front doors. For the grand final, every single patron got a care pack with 4 masks in it, hand sanitizer, you name it, they had it. It was literally a slip-on backpack with a whole heap of goodies in there. And we were probably seeing between 5 and 10% of use of masks. So I don't think you'll see massive surge in that space until you would actually see some level of risk in the community. But that,
if I could jump in there, Todd,
yes.
That's because you had virtually no community transmission. I came out of a state where we had very high numbers, and I was quite surprised at, I suppose, how lax things were in Queensland, given what we had been experiencing in Victoria. And we are all wearing masks here. I think if the situation was to arise again and there's a third wave of COVID, then it just becomes a part of your everyday life. It's just like you put your mobile phone in your pocket, you take your mask with you. And we're all very much used to doing that in Victoria now. So I would be interested to see if, you know, masks became compulsory in Victorian stadiums. I think there would be a huge uptake, given what we have all experienced as a state in 2020.
Yeah, I completely agree, Lindy. I think what probably the point I'd make there is you can implement a whole overlay of things that you would like to occur, and best practice even. You know, the health advice was when you can't maintain social distancing, you should have a mask. But if the community is not seeing a risk more broadly outside of your 4 walls or the facility you're in, they'll make their own decisions and they'll respond to that. But if you were to see a change in that environment more broadly across the community, I think that the uptake would be significant. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'd add some comments to that. So we've obviously run 6 events from the start of September, you know, going through to last week at the end of October, and the the change in people's attitudes over that period of time, and our customers and spectators in particular. So these are non-paying people in an open air event, and we've also got members of the public passing through many of our venues. You know, for example, at Raby Bay in Brisbane, we're right next to the Cleveland train station. It's a major transport hub, so we have people coming through that. So, you know, we have our signs up. We say, you know, this is a COVID safe venue and these are the questions you need to, you know, stop, you know, only enter if you haven't been in a hot spot and all of that. We have portable hand sanitizer stations. We have our own set of those that we can bring around to different venues. We put all those things in place, but, you know, people's compliance has completely changed over the course of 2 months here in Queensland. And because we haven't had any community transmission. I was sort of thinking about that in terms of our border reopening between Queensland and the rest of the country, and we're going to have people from Queensland going to events in other parts of the country with this expectation that it will be no different to what they've had in Queensland. You know, and the same with people from, say, Tasmania, where there hasn't been any cases being able to come into Victoria. And maybe we won't get the compliance in those situations. So the next change is that. So I think what we need to be doing in the event space is be seen to be doing what we can. So as I say, the hand sanitizer stations, having the social distancing marking on the ground, that sort of thing. You know, so it's those things that we need to put in place, and that will allow us to be seen to be doing the things that we need to be doing. But then at the end of the day, people have to take their own personal responsibility. And that's why I think where we're going to end up with is a code of practice that's, you know, going to be implemented across the industry, and recommendations rather than necessarily requirements. I think that's where ultimately we're going to have to end up being.
One of the big challenges I see is for ticketing agencies moving forward, and we experienced a little bit of that, particularly at Nissan Arena. If COVID-safe plans continue to be implemented moving forward, then there's a lot of work that needs to be done on rebuilding ticketing software programs to be able to deliver those regulations in terms of being able to comply with social distancing. It's not as simple as every second seat is vacant. People buy seats in blocks. They come as family groups who are permitted to sit together. There were a lot of challenges with ticketing, I would have to say, across the bigger venue. And particularly, you know, we're still working at 50% capacity in indoor stadiums at the moment. So I think organisations like Ticketek, Ticketmaster, they may need to rework some of their software packages to be able to comply with that, because I would imagine those sorts of requirements may stay in place for some time.
Oh, and the huge cost on them around the additional administration. I mean, I'll just give you one example for us, which was, you know, with the border being closed between New South Wales and Queensland, we had about 30% of our registrants in the Gold Coast Running Festival across the border. And so there we were, they weren't able to actually come to our event. And so we were managing refunds. Now, an event that if these people had entered 6 months ago, you've got a quarter of them with a different credit card. So you can't just automatically refund onto those cards. The administration cost of that was massive. And I worked out it was costing us about $15 as a company, about $15 a refund in a situation where we really couldn't recoup any of that. So and we're a small company, as I say, and then scale that up to a stadium or a series like what you have, and the cost is into the millions.
That's right. So that's probably something that we all need to be mindful of moving forward, that there will be a lot of those costs that perhaps the average punter or member of a club is not aware of because of the impact that COVID has had on administering and making sure that we do remain COVID safe. So who knows where those costs are going to go and what that will do with some of our operational budgets.
If I could just add, Andrew, probably 2 points on the ticketing. They were critical in terms of getting approvals to start to bring people back. If we couldn't identify who was in what seat at what time in what location, we never would have got out of the blocks. That was the number one area that health were focused on. We had multiple audits post-event that were done completely cold, where health turned around to us and said, so we'd have a Saturday night event, the phone would ring at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning and say, we're doing a desktop exercise that there was a patron in row B, seat 7, blah, blah, blah. We want 3,000 people that were in the immediate location from there, all their data back to us within the hour. And they were the level of scrutiny and tests that were occurring behind the scenes. So we would need, and it didn't matter whether it was day or night, Monday or Sunday, we had to have engagement with the ticketing company, pull the data and have it delivered to health to satisfy those requirements. The first time we did it cold, we missed it by 16 minutes. It was an hour 16. The second time we brought it back to 52 minutes. And this was 3,000 plus records of individuals, not just who was seated in there, but what ushers were in there, what food and beverage attendants were in those locations that were servicing those people, the entire spectrum of venue operations. We needed to actually throw a net over those people and provide that data. And then they ran contact tracing tests against that. If you don't have your ticketing partner absolutely on board, I think the whole thing falls apart. The second point I would make is, again, in that agility space, once we're allowed to open at 2,000 and then we moved to 25%, the second conversation that occurred was, okay, we've got that platform now and the ticketing build for that. Let's start to work on 50%. Let's start to work on 75%, because the time that's needed to do the next build is quite critical from a ticketing perspective. And it's a complex piece that needs to be undertaken between the ticketing partner and the venue.
They're not simple, but not that ticketing was ever simple, but they are much more complex now.
And I think that's really interesting, I think, for us to hear from each of you in terms of the experiences you've gone through and what is critical and what are some of these knock-on effects that are occurring. And we're not out the other side by any means, but I think it's interesting, particularly for some of us whose events haven't relaunched yet, or particularly if you're sitting in Victoria, we're sort of, some way behind in terms of in the journey of how to reactivate our industry. So I've really appreciated you all sharing your thoughts, and I'm conscious we're coming sort of towards the end of our hour. So I might come back to each of you, I guess, for your future priorities or any sort of key message that you think you'd like to share that people might want to take away and have front of mind in our work as we re-emerge. Perhaps, Todd, I'll just come back to you in terms of what's on the next horizon for you and your team and what you're looking forward to.
Well, the last couple of weeks have been nice to recharge and reset the batteries, I must say. We've got a Bledisloe Cup match tomorrow night in one of our venues, so about 35,000 probably in Suncorp Stadium, and then State of Origin in 10 days. So we've got some big events on the horizon, but also we're actually looking and planning towards what the next 6 months look like from a high performance perspective, with athletes moving into Queensland pre-Olympics and doing some pre-training camps before they launch over to Tokyo. So the spectrum's pretty broad. Community sports bounce back considerably in some of our venues. So end of year swimming carnivals, athletics carnivals, those sorts of things. I think we've got about 500 events across 3 community venues to deliver between now and Christmas. So there's a huge amount that's still on our radar. But, there's a massive amount of positivity as well. And one of the things that we've been blessed with has been that we've been able to have these events that the staff can focus on. And we've really felt for our counterparts in the state where, without that next target or that next thing to focus on, it's a pretty dire situation, and it's very demotivating. And so we've been really fortunate to be able to sort of target these things. We've been trying to share as much as we can with what we call our sister agencies and our sister counterparts. We're talking to them every fortnight around the country, including New Zealand, and use to share our learnings and actually try and help as much as possible.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic to hear there's a lot of activity which is coming up, Todd, and congrats again, I guess, to you and your broad team, your various teams for what you've achieved in recent weeks and months. So I look forward to seeing much more of that. And Lindy, from your perspective, I guess any final message or takeaway or priority that you see in your work?
I just don't think you should ever underestimate the power of sport in this country and the way it unites people, even in incredibly difficult circumstances. What we were able to deliver with teams, players, coaches, volunteers that made enormous sacrifices for, the good of the sport was quite incredible. And there will be such an eagerness, I know in Victoria, that's where I'm based, to really get sport up and running again, and particularly those grassroots and underpinning high performance programs. And I think the fact that we delivered such a great competition in quite difficult circumstances has really energised the rest of the netball community to make sure that it's onward and upward, and we can really do anything as a sport. Nothing is beyond us. That's
a great message, Lindy. Thank you. Actually, a message from Kath Roweth just popped up in the Q&A box, which a name you'll be familiar with, who's doing some great things, working on major events over in the UK at the moment. But that's obviously quite a different environment again that she and event people are having to deal with in other parts of the world. So in some ways, I think we're quite fortunate here. Still lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities starting to come about. So looking forward to seeing those emerge, obviously. And Brendon, for you and your team, in terms of what's next, priorities or messages for us to take away and perhaps use in our work?
Yeah, sure. And, one of the things I've been thinking about is how sucked into the business I became through this COVID process, and through that necessity of having to get in, and it was all in, get it sorted. And a little bit like Todd, the last couple of weeks, we've sort of gone for a bit of a breather. And now we're starting to think about our product and more about the quality of what we're delivering and the experience. Because when we first delivered these events, people were just so happy to be at an event, and they were very forgiving about some of the things that maybe weren't quite the way that we wanted to deliver or know that we should be delivering and can deliver. So we're going to be getting back to focusing a bit more in that space. And we've also got a number of things that we'd started planning, 12 months, 18 months ago that just got shelved, just got put on hold because, who's going to put on new events? Who's going to try and develop products and through this? So now that we've kind of got ourselves back upright and away, we're going to start to look at those things again. In particular, myself, as I say, of getting out, working more on my business rather than being dragged and working in the business.
Yeah, that's great, Brendon. And look, I'm conscious we're coming towards the end of our time. I know we could have talked for much longer, and there's so much that you've all learned that you can share, and I really appreciate you sharing some of those key thoughts with us today. So thank you for giving up your time to share your thoughts, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate everyone supporting the show, and obviously do hope that you've got some things to take away and use in your work. We will be back in a few weeks' time. We will be continuing these shows. We're lining up another great group of industry leaders to share their perspectives. So please do keep following as you can. As always, if I can help in any way, please reach out. If you're interested in the other shows that we've had, they're all on the website. If you think there's someone in your team or in your network that might benefit from hearing what we've talked about today. We'll be posting the show later today, so please do share it with those you think may find it valuable. There's lots of other resources and things on my site in terms of online courses and free downloads and things which may be useful for you in your work. So thanks again for everyone for tuning in. Thank you again, Todd, Lindy and Brendon. Really appreciate it and look forward to speaking again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. A pleasure to be on.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you.